Breaking. Your soulmate publicly confessed their love. Everyone was left speechless. My beloved child, stop for just one quiet moment, because a single sentence spoken somewhere today has already started changing a future that is quietly moving toward you. You were not expecting to hear this. You were not searching for it. Yet somehow, at this exact moment, these words have found their way to you. That is not the surprising part. The surprising part is what happened before you pressed play. Somewhere, in a conversation that no one believed would become unforgettable, a heart stopped hiding. A silence that had lasted far too long finally gave way to truth. And when those words escaped into the open, every person listening forgot what they were about to say next. Stay a little longer, because this story is not about coincidence. It is about timing. Imagine standing in a room where everyone expects another ordinary conversation. Faces are calm. Voices are familiar. Nothing seems different. Then someone takes a slow breath. Their eyes stop wandering. The noise around them begins to fade. They are no longer thinking about what people might say tomorrow. They are no longer afraid of being misunderstood. For the first time, they choose honesty over hesitation. No one knew what was coming. Then came the words. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just unmistakably real. I cannot keep pretending anymore. The room became strangely quiet. Not because people were confused, but because they realized they had just witnessed something they rarely see in this world, someone choosing truth when silence would have been easier. What if the greatest change in your journey never begins with a grand event? What if it begins with one person deciding that hiding their feelings is no longer an option? Think about that. Sometimes destiny does not knock on the front door. Sometimes it whispers through an ordinary afternoon and transforms everything before anyone notices. The confession itself was not rehearsed. It carried no perfect script. It carried something much stronger, certainty. Every word sounded lighter than fear. Every sentence sounded heavier than doubt. And with each passing moment, the people listening slowly understood that this was not admiration speaking. This was devotion. This was someone finally allowing their heart to stand where it had always wanted to stand. Wait before you decide this message is only a story. Because there is another layer that most people never notice. Whenever genuine feelings are finally spoken aloud, they do something extraordinary. They begin rearranging possibilities. Conversations change. Decisions change. Even people who thought they understood everything suddenly realized they were only seeing the surface. That is why everyone was left speechless. Not because they expected perfection. Because they witnessed courage. There is an invisible difference between someone talking about love, and someone revealing it without asking for permission from fear. That difference can change an entire future. Perhaps this is why you felt pulled toward this message today. Not to predict tomorrow, but to remember that hidden feelings cannot remain hidden forever. Every sincere heart reaches a moment where silence becomes heavier than truth. And when that moment arrives, even the strongest walls become doors. Before you move on, hold this thought carefully. Some people spend years waiting for certainty. Others suddenly become the certainty they were waiting for. That unexpected transformation is exactly what began unfolding here. The confession was only the beginning. Because after those unforgettable words settled into the silence, something even more remarkable started happening. Eyes met differently. Smiles carried new meaning. Questions appeared where assumptions once lived. The atmosphere itself seemed to shift, as though everyone had stepped into a future they had never imagined only minutes earlier. You might miss the turning point if you stop listening now, because the next chapter reveals why this public confession happened at this exact moment. And what unseen chain of events quietly led to a truth that could no longer stay hidden. Listen closely, because what happened after that unforgettable confession was even more astonishing than the words themselves. Most people believe a public declaration is the end of the story. It isn't. It is only the moment when hidden chapters finally begin to reveal themselves. Stay with me, because the next few moments explain why everything unfolded exactly as it did, and why every person standing there suddenly felt they were witnessing something much bigger than an ordinary conversation. For several long moments, no one spoke. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that appears when truth arrives before anyone has prepared an answer. Some lowered their eyes. Others smiled without realizing it. A few exchanged quiet glances, almost asking one another, "Did that really just happen?" But the one who had spoken remained calm. There was no need to explain. No need to defend those words. Real feelings rarely need extra proof once they are finally spoken. That calm confidence changed the atmosphere. People who had once believed love was only about perfect timing suddenly understood something different. Sometimes the right moment is simply the moment someone becomes brave enough to stop hiding. Think about that for a second. How many opportunities disappear because fear speaks louder than hope? How many beautiful futures wait behind one honest sentence? Perhaps far more than anyone realizes. The remarkable part was not that your soulmate confessed their feelings. The remarkable part was that they finally chose authenticity over uncertainty. That single decision created a ripple no one expected. One conversation inspired another. One smile encouraged another. Even those who had quietly doubted the power of sincere emotions began remembering moments they had buried inside themselves. Truth has a strange way of awakening truth. And that is exactly what unfolded. Every passing minute felt different from the one before. The room no longer carried the weight of hesitation. Instead, it carried possibility. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because something genuine had finally stepped into the light. Wait till the final moment, because the next revelation explains why this confession could no longer remain hidden. Sometimes life prepares countless invisible moments before revealing one unforgettable scene. Small conversations. Unexpected encounters. Quiet reflections. Tiny choices nobody notices. Each one slowly builds toward a single turning point. When viewed separately, they seem ordinary. Viewed together, they become destiny's quiet masterpiece. That is why this moment surprised everyone. People believed they were watching a beginning. In reality, They were witnessing the result of countless unseen decisions made long before anyone recognized their importance. Maybe this message has found you for the same reason. Not to promise impossible outcomes, but to remind you that meaningful change often happens long before it becomes visible. Seeds grow beneath the surface before anyone sees the first sign of life. Hope works much the same way. If this message has given you a new perspective, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and if these stories inspire you, subscribing simply means you'll be here for the next chapter when it arrives. Before this story continues, consider one final question. What if the most powerful confession was never the sentence spoken aloud? What if it was the quiet decision made long before that day, the decision to stop letting fear write the ending? Because in the next chapter, you'll discover what happened after everyone walked away, and why one unexpected conversation changed the direction of everything that followed. There is one final piece you have not heard yet, and without it, the entire story feels incomplete. The confession may have captured everyone's attention, but what happened after the crowd slowly disappeared carried an even deeper meaning. Stay a little longer, because this quiet chapter reveals why some moments continue changing lives long after the applause, the surprise, and the conversations have ended. As people began walking away, something unusual happened. No one rushed to forget what they had witnessed. Instead, they carried it with them. Some replayed every word in their minds. Others found themselves smiling without knowing why. A few looked toward the horizon as though they had suddenly remembered a dream they had almost abandoned. That is the hidden power of sincere truth. It does not disappear when the moment ends. It travels. It lingers. It quietly transforms the hearts willing to receive it. Meanwhile, the one who had confessed their feelings felt something they had not experienced in a very long time. Peace. Not because every question had been answered. Not because every future detail had become clear. But because they were no longer carrying the exhausting weight of pretending. Authenticity has a remarkable gift. The moment it replaces fear, even uncertainty begins to feel lighter. Pause here for a moment. What if courage is not the absence of questions? What if courage is choosing honesty even while the future is still unfolding? That realization changes everything. Many people spend years waiting for perfect certainty before expressing what truly matters. Yet life often rewards those who speak with sincerity rather than perfection. That was the invisible lesson everyone carried home that day. The confession was never about impressing anyone. It was about becoming completely aligned with the truth already living inside the heart. And when that alignment finally happened, something extraordinary followed. New conversations began. Old misunderstandings quietly faded. People who had built walls around their emotions started wondering whether those walls were ever necessary at all. One genuine act inspired another. Then another. Then another. The ripple continued moving far beyond the place where it first began. Perhaps this is why you were guided to hear this message today. Not because someone else's journey should become your prediction, but because every sincere story reminds us of something timeless. Hope grows strongest when truth is no longer afraid to be seen. Before you leave, remember this carefully. The loudest moments are not always the most meaningful. Sometimes the quiet decision made in a single heart becomes the beginning of countless beautiful possibilities. And maybe, just maybe, the next remarkable chapter of your own journey will not begin with perfect circumstances. It will begin with one honest choice. One peaceful step. One courageous moment. Because every unforgettable story starts the same way. Not with certainty, but with someone deciding that truth deserves a voice. And when that voice finally rises, the future has a way of answering in ways no one could have imagined at the beginning of the journey. Wait, because the story did not end with a confession. In many ways, that unforgettable moment was only the opening page of something far greater. What unfolded during the days that followed surprised even those who believed they had already seen everything. Stay with this until the very end of this chapter, because the next revelation explains why one courageous decision can quietly reshape an entire future. The world has an unusual habit. It remembers bold moments. But it rarely notices the quiet transformation that follows them. After that public confession, people expected excitement to fade. Instead, the opposite happened. Conversations became more meaningful. Smiles became more genuine. Even ordinary moments carried a sense of possibility that had not existed before. It was as though honesty had unlocked a door everyone else had forgotten was there. And then, something even more remarkable happened. The person who had spoken those unforgettable words no longer searched for signs. They no longer wondered if they had done the right thing. For the first time in a long while, they walked forward with quiet confidence. Not because every answer had arrived, but because they had finally become the kind of person who trusted the truth more than fear. That change was impossible to ignore. People noticed it. Not through loud celebrations. Not through dramatic speeches. But through the calmness that surrounded them. Real courage leaves a different kind of signature. It replaces hesitation with peace. It replaces uncertainty with purpose. Think about this for a moment. How often do people wait for life to change before they become confident? Yet sometimes confidence itself becomes the beginning of change. That is exactly what this moment revealed. Every sincere choice creates another opportunity. Every honest step invites another. Every act of authenticity encourages someone else to stop hiding behind doubt. The ripple continued growing. Not because anyone planned it, but because truth naturally inspires more truth. Perhaps that is why this message has crossed your path today. Not to promise impossible outcomes. Not to predict every detail of tomorrow. But to remind you that meaningful connections are strengthened when honesty is allowed to breathe. Before you continue to the next chapter, pause for one question. What if the greatest turning point in your story is not something waiting far ahead? What if it begins the very moment you stop underestimating the quiet strength already within you? If this story has encouraged you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. Reading different perspectives often reminds us that hope has many voices. And if you'd like to continue this journey together, subscribing simply means you'll be here when the next chapter unfolds. Now listen carefully. Because there was still one mystery left unsolved. After everything that had happened. After every unexpected reaction. After every heart had been moved, a single message appeared that no one saw coming. It was simple. It was quiet. Yet the meaning behind it was powerful enough to leave everyone wondering whether this confession had always been part of a much bigger journey. And that is where the next chapter begins. Before you decide that every mystery has already been uncovered, pause for one more moment. Because the message that appeared after the confession carried no dramatic announcement, no grand explanation, and no demand for attention. Yet somehow, those few simple words echoed more deeply than anything that had happened before. Stay a little longer, because this quiet revelation may become the most unforgettable part of the entire journey. The message was short. Almost unbelievably short. It simply said, "I'm finally at peace with telling the truth." Nothing more. No elaborate story. No attempt to impress anyone. No search for approval. Just a calm declaration from a heart that had stopped carrying the burden of silence. Those who read it expected another surprise. Instead, they found something much more powerful: clarity. And clarity has a remarkable way of changing everything. Sometimes people spend years searching for the perfect moment, the perfect words, the perfect circumstances. But life often moves forward the instant someone embraces sincerity instead of perfection. That was the lesson quietly unfolding before everyone. Days passed. The excitement slowly settled. The conversations became quieter. Yet something unexpected remained. The memory. People continued talking about that confession, not because it was sensational, but because it reminded them of something they had forgotten. That genuine feelings never lose their value. Truth never becomes ordinary. And courage never goes unnoticed. Think carefully about this. How many beautiful opportunities are waiting on the other side of one honest decision? How many dreams remain hidden simply because someone believes they must wait a little longer? Perhaps far fewer than we imagine. The remarkable thing was that the confession had begun inspiring people who had never expected to change. Some reached out to old friends. Some repaired conversations they had delayed for years. Others simply decided to become more authentic in the way they lived each day. One truthful moment had become the beginning of countless quiet transformations. That is how meaningful change often works. It rarely announces itself. It quietly moves from one heart to another. Until hope becomes stronger than hesitation. Maybe that is why this story found you today. Not to tell you exactly what tomorrow holds, but to remind you that your own journey is still being written. Every chapter has prepared you for the next one. Every delay has taught you patience. Every unanswered question has quietly shaped your perspective. And perhaps the page you're standing on right now is not the ending you once feared. Perhaps it is only the final paragraph before a completely new beginning. Hold on to that thought. Because the greatest stories are never remembered for how loudly they began. They are remembered for the quiet truth that changed everything. And the next chapter reveals one final discovery. A realization that no one understood until they looked back and saw how every small moment had been guiding them toward this unforgettable turning point. One last mystery remains, and strangely enough, it was never hidden in the confession itself. It was hidden in everything that happened after people stopped talking about it. Stay until the final sentence of this chapter, because what seemed like the ending quietly became the beginning of something no one expected. As the days continued, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The conversations became fewer. The excitement softened. The world moved forward. Yet beneath the ordinary routine, something extraordinary was still unfolding. The public confession had done more than reveal one person's feelings. It had awakened a new way of seeing. People who once believed that honesty was risky began realizing that hiding their truth had cost them even more. That realization spread quietly. Not through headlines. Not through applause. But through simple choices made every single day. Someone finally said the words they had been holding back. Someone else forgave an old misunderstanding. Another person decided to stop letting fear make every important decision. The ripple continued. And every ripple began with one courageous moment. Now think about this. What if the greatest purpose of that confession was never to amaze the crowd? What if it was meant to remind every heart listening that authenticity creates possibilities fear can never imagine? That changes the entire story. Because suddenly, this was no longer about one soulmate. It became a story about hope itself. Hope that survives uncertainty. Hope that keeps moving even when the future is still invisible. Hope that quietly whispers, "Keep going, your next chapter has not been written yet." Perhaps that whisper is reaching you now. Perhaps this message appeared today because you needed a reminder that meaningful journeys rarely unfold in a straight line. There are pauses. Unexpected turns. Moments of waiting. Moments of wondering. Yet every step carries a purpose, even when that purpose cannot be seen immediately. Before you leave this story behind, remember one truth. The people who create unforgettable futures are not always